all the new weapons added to Splatoon 3 since its launch, Pencil over here might be the most interesting. This weapon was seen as hot trash on launch, and people weren't wrong. It was. But wow, has this weapon had an insane glow up, and rather fast too. Recently, Pencil was used by many of the top North American teams in the NA Open over other cooler options like NZAP, and this was played on version 4.1 before last-ditch effort and 190p nerfs that hurt Zap disproportionately. I still see a lot of people very confused on what happened to this weapon, so today, let's take a bit of a deep dive into how this weapon became good so fast and what we can learn from it. If you enjoy this kind of analytical Splatoon content, it really helps me to grow the channel if you subscribe, so please consider it if you enjoy the video. But before we get into that, this video is sponsored by Factor. This company is fresh, ready-made meals delivered to your doorstep to make healthy eating easy. If you're looking for a calorie-conscious option during the busy season, try delicious, dietarian-approved, calorie-smart meals with around or less than 550 calories per serving. And if you need an extra boost to support your wellness goals and feel your best to tackle a busy autumn, try Protein Plus with 30 grams of protein or more per serving. With Factor, you can rest assured that you're making a sustainable choice. They offset 100% of their delivery emissions, source 100% renewable energy for their production sites and offices, and feature sustainably sourced seafood in their meals. If you're a bit too busy to cook this fall, but want to make sure you're eating well, with Factor you can skip the extra trip to the grocery store, preparing and cleaning up, while still getting all the flavor and nutritional quality you need. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are ready in just 2 minutes, so all you have to do is heat and enjoy to go back to crushing your goals. It can be a great way to save time while still keeping up with proper meals. You can head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code ProChara50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. Thank you so much to Factor for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to talking about Pencil. Let's start with the two things the weapon had on launch that, while they weren't enough to save the weapon from being bad, would add up to being very important as it got buffed. The first of which is a synergistic kit. At the time, Tacticooler was very unbuffed. We'll get to that more later, and one of the weaker specials in the game, as it didn't really help a lot going against crab spam. However, it did work very well for the weapon. Sprinkler helped play to the main weapon's painting strength, as compared to other chargers, its 5 shots allowed it to put a lot more turf on the floor from a considerable distance, and because of that, Sprinkler helped bolster its special output. On top of that, it's the only long-range cooler option in the game at that point, and even nowadays is the only backline option for it. It allows you to run very aggressive players alongside the weapon, as well as boost its strafe speed, something the weapon is already quite good at. These two things would be stuff the weapon could always fall back on. The problem, of course, is it was weak balance-wise. So many stats on the weapon were worse that we'll get to later, but on top of that, it was also just an awful meta for it. The main problem with the snipewritter is its object damage. It has horrible multipliers, and trying to break things like Crab and Booyah Bomb were awful. In the meta at this time, 3 to 4 of the specials on the comps you were fighting were Crabs and Booyah Bombs. This, on top of a special that didn't work well in the meta, was one of the main reasons the weapon was bad. So, Nintendo took a look at it, and we got some balance patches. Let's take a look at what was changed. First, with the main weapon. Now, when looking at the patch history of snipewritter, it's easy to go, that's it? It's only 3 direct changes to the main weapon. How impactful can those really be? Surely something like Luna's buffs, for example, is a lot more impactful. I mean, look at this list from since Splatoon 2 came out, and then all the changes in Splatoon 3 too? Like, how is something like this not as important? Well, the way Luna Blaster was buffed wasn't really good. Don't get me wrong, none of the changes they did are bad per se, but they didn't really fix many of the weapon's problems. There were very few things that they buffed that actually helped the weapon a lot, such as the decrease in end lag it got in 5.1.0. Many of these changes are minuscule to say the least, like increased radius of ink coverage when shots hit a wall. Yeah, that's definitely gonna save this weapon stuck in low tier. Even some of the most impactful buffs it got, like a slight radius size increase, were by such a tiny amount compared to how it was nerfed in the first place. Like, yeah, going from 35 to 35.7 units is definitely impactful when you nerfed it from 40 to 35. Pencil, on the other hand, made every buff it got count. First, they buffed the maximum damage from 60 to 68. This made it a much more reliable combo number, as well as slightly alleviated its damaged objects issues, making it a little bit better. Being able to combo with other weapons is very important for a backline that isn't going to be able to one-shot. Buffing it to this number allowed it to work with many other weapons that it couldn't work with previously. For example, let's say you paired it with a range blaster. That's a pretty common combo. Pre-patch, the range would have to hit the inside 50% of the radius for a guaranteed combo, whereas now they can hit pretty much any part of it. It also just makes it easier for smaller amounts of damage to be able to combo with the one-shot. It sounds small, but there's a surprising amount of things that benefit from this change. 4.0, however, did even more impactful changes. First off, the ink consumption of the weapon was reduced by approximately 13%. This made it much closer to getting 3 full charges off before you had to recover ink. This might be the most underrated change. range. Not only do you get more distance pressure, but you're also getting more paint and uptime. Uptime is basically the metric of how long you're affecting the map. The worse your ink efficiency is, the more amount of time you're going to have to spend recovering ink and not doing much else. Being able to get almost an entire extra charge out of it is really valuable, especially when being able to have reliable paint for teammates to play off of is one of its main strengths. On top of that, the weapon's movement speed was increased. Again, for something that wants to get reliable combos off and stay alive, the ability to close the gap against awkward matchups is important. Remember, this thing has splatter scope range. That's a lot. Being able to move slightly faster could be the difference between outspacing weapons trying to close the gap or going against long-range weapons like E-liter that could potentially outspace it. After all, crazy mobility is why something like the heavy edit spotting ends up still being able to fight it pretty well, because the mobility can make up for that. Giving that to an even longer range weapon is even more powerful. So yeah, the changes it got were pretty good, but that's not even all of it. Sprinkler got a buff from 5 to 8 seconds on its first okay, that one might not matter as much. They did buff Sprinkler, you know, that's nice. But let's talk about what they did to Cooler. Skipping over a lot of the bug fixes, one huge change from Tacticooler was making Respawn Punisher and Haunt not counter it. Believe it or not, pre-patch, you would wear Respawn Punisher and the Cooler, QR, and Special Saver would pretty much not matter. Really weird. This meant that counter-picking the special was really easy. Pick Respawn Punisher E-liter, and that Cooler's suddenly not going to matter that much. Later in the 3.1 patch, they allowed you to throw the Cooler further away, and more importantly, roughly double the horizontal range you could grab a beverage. Tacticooler's main weakness is how close you have to be to grab it. Every single player getting the buff has to be in a small area. Making this radius larger made it a lot easier to grab it without clumping up as much, especially since you can even grab it through walls in a few places, like through one part of Hagglefish, for example, to be able to grab it on the left flank even though the Cooler is in zone. On top of that, a patch later, they allowed the effect to last 2 seconds longer and made sure the special power-up curve was still strong, meaning when paired with it, you would get an additional 3 to 4 seconds of duration compared to pre-patch. The main, special, and sub all got pretty impactful buffs, but that's not even all of it. The most important thing is not what changed to Pencil, but what changed to everything else. By the time all of these patches had happened and the game had developed, the object-heavy meta was no more. Instead, it was replaced by a fast-paced meta. One of the main weapons wasn't Splash, it was Ballpoint, a weapon with a horrible matchup against Pencil, and the meta special became Jetpack, something Chargers and, in general, SnipeWriter is very good against, something that Tacticooler is really good at countering. Suddenly, Cooler options were being considered, and the ability to have Cooler on a weapon that you could pair with 3 aggressive players for extra aggression, especially once Jetpack got toned back a little bit, suddenly became something many top teams were interested in. With good matchups against so many mid-range options, and the meta continuing to develop in its favor, since it isn't as hurt by stuff like the last-ditch effort nerfs, SnipeWriter has enjoyed a solid spot in the meta, and we've seen its own flavor of comps. These haven't replaced stuff like Zap, for instance, but they've allowed it to be another option. And this is where those core design decisions from the very beginning had an impact. The kit was already good enough to be meta, it just needed a better balance, which is what happened. And the main weapon's unique strengths of chip damage at a distance and 5 shots to help with charger reliability is something really valuable. Those strengths couldn't be played to before, but now they can, and it has been recognized by top players as a very important weapon. Sometimes it's not about having the longest list of patch notes that matters, but rather having the right impactful ones, along with the meta that can shift more in your favor, and good design choices from the very beginning can sometimes skyrocket a weapon to the meta. I hope the devs are able to balance other weapons like they've done here, because it's been a fantastic job, and I've really enjoyed seeing it. Let me know your thoughts on the SnipeWriter below, and I'll see you all next time.